Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Quarterly Care Managers Conference. I'm Amanda Harper, the Assistant Statewide Care Manager Coordinator. The materials for today's conference were shared by the Visor E, so the link is below. You can either access them through this link or go to our website and go to the tab for care coordination organizations under providers, and you'll see under care managers or provider information the e-visories all listed there, and the most recent one will be the e-visory including the materials for today. Just want to thank everybody for joining us, for taking the time out of your day to attend this conference. We are also recording this conference and we'll post it for the quarter to our website for viewing following this conference, for information that you would like to either listen to again or to share with staff that weren't able to be present. As Susan had mentioned, there is a Q&A feature for this. We will pause at the conclusion of each presentation to allow for some time for questions, where we will review the questions and ask what we can as time allows. We do recognize that there continues to be a lot of questions as we transition, and things that are not answered today, outstanding questions that you might have. We encourage that you work closely with your supervisor and with your CCO leadership to determine if there have been answers to these questions or what agency practices your CCO is using to address different things as they arise. And if questions can't be answered, to please reach out to OPWDD. On later slides, we do have our CCSL contacts. But so as I said, we'll answer questions as time allows today. We really want you to focus on the content of the material. So at the conclusion of each presentation, we'll review the questions that have been asked and take some time with our presenters to discuss. For our agenda today, we have our hot topics. We'll have a presentation on self-direction, an overview, and kind of getting into how those services are listed in the life plan. We'll have a presentation on START. We'll have a presentation on front door processes, LCD redetermination, and care managers' role and the health home, the 6 health home core services. So we have a packed agenda, and we'll try to get through all of it before 12:30. So to begin with hot topics, these are the things that we're going to be covering. To begin, the health home policy manual that hopefully everyone is familiar with this manual. We just want to again share it, and this link that this link here is on our OPWDD webpage, and it's going to link you to where this health home policy manual is on the DOH page, but we encourage you to access it through this link on the OPWDD page, because we're going to continue to post any updates to the policy manual on this link. So you'll see on this slide that highlighted in yellow is the most recent update since the last quarterly conference that we had in December. So we'll continue to share this and highlight changes to the policy manual as they're posted. But please check back to this link to be able to see things that are updated, that we continue to, as CCOs are operationalized, to review the information in the policy manual and make updates as they're needed. Again, as I had mentioned, and we've covered this before through this conference and through the e-visory, but we want to make sure that you have these contacts for our OPWDD regional office care coordination support liaisons. These are knowledgeable OPWDD staff that can provide technical assistance with things as they come up with CCO questions regarding policy questions and things that come up around enrollment or what have you, so they can really help to provide technical assistance and to triage some things as they come up. As I said, continue to work closely with your supervisor and CCO leadership to see if questions have been answered prior to reaching out, but please utilize these contacts as they continue to further learn and understand the requirements of the CCO program and can assist you. The choices forms, so there's two pieces here that, again, we've shared the link to the OPWDD webpage. This is for the choices page. And if you scroll down on the choices page and look under CCO information, you'll see the link to these 4 guides that really lay out for you the steps to submit for the CCO1 enrollment, the CCO2 transfer and disenrollment, document submission, and LCD transmittal forms. So these user guides are going to outline for you the user access that is required to be able to submit and make changes to these forms. And they will go through the steps because there is quite a difference as far as the functionality between the MSC 1, 2, and 3 and how these CCO 1 and 2 forms work. So we really encourage that you review these guides step by step as the CCO staff that are responsible for submitting these really understand and have quality practices in place to make sure these forms are being completed correctly to help everybody out, in getting them done correctly and not having to spend time on the back end with trying to correct issues that might come up. So I also want to highlight, and some people may have noticed if it's your role to submit some of these forms, that there are some minor updates to the choices forms. So the following slide, you see a screenshot here from our test site within Choices that just shows what it will look like. There's just some minor changes to the way that things are ordered. This was to, an effort to assist in the accuracy and the ease of use with these forms. So it's not drastic, but it's just to help to hopefully increase the accuracy in selecting the correct program code and service type. You'll notice on the right where you see DDSO and there's the drop down that shows all the DDSOs. If you first select DDSO before selecting the CCO program, only CCO programs for that DDSO are going to come up. So that can also help with ensuring that you're selecting the correct program code. So hopefully, these are things again that were minor, but if you're going in to submit them, just note that it might look a little bit different and take time to review the form and make sure that you've completed it correctly. There also, you'll see along the bottom is a yellow ribbon that says, please verify the tab's program code and DDSO before submitting. So this is just kind of adding that extra prompt to make sure that the information that was submitted is accurate, that it matches what the person has consented to and the CCO program that they're hoping to enter. So hopefully this helps. Any further changes or improvements to these forms will be shared either through this conference or through the advisory. All right, so we want to just quick highlight, we just want to say that the web page, and I'm sure some people that frequent our web page have noticed that it has been under some construction, that we're really trying to clean it up and organize it in a way to make it as user-friendly as possible. So I'll go quick into the website, but here is the link. The first bullet is the link to the CCO information that's going to be most useful to CCO staff. So that link is going to take you to the page with our main information in it. The second bullet is the Advisory 6-19 that was shared on February 15th. And this advisory really lays out, using the links some of the main information that OPWDD has shared that we want to make sure is right at people's fingertips. It provides the link to the staff action plan and service delivery training that was done. Also the link to the OPWDD care management life planning and service delivery process. This also has a Q&A. So at this link, you'll see the recording of this presentation, the PowerPoint, and also a question and answers that accompanies it. That is a great resource. This advisory also goes through other materials that we have on the website, the link to the info sessions that we're having twice a month, the policy manual that we just went through. It'll go through, it also highlights this conference and that the recordings are available quarterly for these conferences, and some of the other information that we've talked about and contact within the regional office. So encourage you to have that advisory at your fingertips. And as I said, I'm going to quick go to the website, so just give me a minute. Okay. All right, so people that have been using our website for a while would notice that typically under, if you see where the cursor is, under services and supports is where a lot of the main MSC information was housed. A lot of that information has now been moved over to providers and staff. So that's where we are right now. If you go providers and staff and you go down to care coordination organizations. All right, luckily we're already there because that's being slow. So the first thing that you'll see is the information for care managers. There's two buttons here. One is for the policy manual. Are you seeing it? Okay, so we're a little frozen, unfortunately. And if it's not going to work, then we'll move on. I don't want to waste anybody's time. But from this page where we're frozen on, is to the right, there's the buttons that you're probably used to seeing where the advisories can be found. It's not working. So that's one way to get to the policy manual and the advisories. If you click on care coordination next, this is going to take you to where those CCSL contacts are, and we're not going there, so we'll just move on. But from this page is where you're going to see a lot of, yeah, it's slowly creeping there. But this page is the main page to go to access a lot of the information. That under care coordination is the contacts for the CCSLs and the advisories. You can also see my cursor is not going to be able to take you there, but under the information for providers tabs, that's where the information sessions are listed, of those lunch and learn sessions that we're having twice a month. And that's where you'll see the registration links for those as well. And the advisory link, and to sign up for the advisory is also going to be under information for providers. So I just want to make a quick note about the advisory. I'm going to stop sharing because this just isn't working. But a quick note about the advisory: if you are having issues that you've signed up for the advisory, but you're finding that you're not receiving it, we do always have them posted to this part of the website, so you can still access them. Obviously, if you're not getting that email, so you will always have access to the most up-to-date one. But when you enter your email into the Sign Me Up bar at the top of the advisory page, you're going to receive a confirmation email to your email that you have to confirm in order to start receiving them. If you don't get that, a lot of times it has something to do with your firewall, and you need to talk to your IT system because they're not getting through, that they're getting stopped somewhere within your system. So please talk with your IT. If you need assistance, please reach out to us and we'll try to help as we can so that you're getting these notifications. But that's what we're most commonly seeing, that it's not an issue with the distribution of the e-Visory. It has to do with being able to receive them through your email system. Okay, so we'll move on from there. Okay, so I'm going to pass the microphone over to our RISFO representative here, Elena DiStefano. I always butcher your last name, I apologize, but she's going to go through the following 2 slides, and then we'll try to allow for a couple of minutes to review if there are any questions in the Q&A when Elena's done.
All right. So the first thing I want to talk to you guys today is about active Medicaid coverage. As a care manager or supervisor, you should be verifying that the person has active Medicaid coverage for the dates that the CCO is trying to bill before contacting OPWDD for overrides or edits. We do have posted on the website a chart so you know which Medicaid coverages are good. I would also mention that we've been having some issues lately with recertifications. You should be keeping track of your recertification dates. They're also on the rosters. You should be getting a renewal form, or the person should be getting a renewal form from the Medicaid district about 1.5 to 2 months before the expiration date. If you routinely don't get it, or the person isn't reliable, or their mail isn't reliable, the thing you can do is ask Medicaid to be put on the person's Medicaid case as an associated name, and you will get a copy of that Medicaid recertification, which means you'll be able to help the person get it in on time. Before contacting OPWDD for any edits, we do request that you, in addition to verifying the Medicaid coverage, that you also verify the person is actually enrolled in your CCO program and on your roster. I will point out in terms of Medicaid coverage that while a person does need to have OPWDD eligibility in choices and in tabs, it doesn't mean that they always have a restriction exception code 95 on their SIN when you look at it in e-Paces, especially if the person is new to OPWDD, new to Medicaid, or has just switched SINs. So don't worry about the 95 not being on there. You can always make us aware of it, but it will eventually get on there with the updates. Speaking of updates, ITS has recently updated some changes to tabs and to choices, which will allow for prospective Medicaid coverage dates to be used for CCO enrollment going forward. This should help with the spend down issues that we've been having, so I hope that will be a change that is for the better. And then my final kind of advertisement is that you should, if you need to, be taking training, eMedNI, which are the people who operate e-Paces and do a lot of the stuff with Medicaid systems. They offer all sorts of trainings of interest, and you can follow this link to get into it. There is e-Paces training that's in person or on the video. Also, there is new provider / new billing training for your billing folks. And I would say, given some of the billing issues that I've seen recently, that if you have billing folks, you may want to go ahead and let them know about this training that's coming up. All right, I'm going to pause for a minute because I can't see all the questions.
Okay, we'll mute.
All right, so one of the questions we've gotten is about the Medicaid spend down changing to a pay-in and how it's going to affect services. This has been a long-term project with DOH. There's nothing on the horizon at the moment. In terms of managed care and when folks go to the MCOs, yes, there's going to be some changes on the spend down there. Instead of your spend down being paid to your local district, you would pay it to your managed care plans. But there's going to be a lot of information coming with that as we go further into managed care. I'm going to talk now about the transitions, if I could.
And just quick, we can say that if you have any questions about your CCO roster, that you should follow up with your CCO leadership about that.
Okay, so earlier this month, I sat down with the Department of Health. We had 381 waiver kids with District 78 Medicaid. This is otherwise known as the Exchange, otherwise known as the New York State Department of Health. We are, at OPWDD, are working to transition all these kids from the New York State of Health to the DSS, so you don't have to and don't have to do it individually. But what DOH really wanted me to make clear with you all is that waiver children, so children who are on the HCBS waiver, have to transition from the New York State of Health to the LDSS. The reason they're forcing this change and this transition on us is basically due to Child Health Plus. It is very easy for a child's case to be transferred from a Medicaid case to a Child Health Plus on the exchange with little to no notice to the families or the providers, which means, hey, nobody gets paid for providing OPWDD services. So, in order to alleviate those concerns and that make sure that the children do not get transferred to Child Health Plus with no knowledge, they want these kids coming out of District 78 and over to the New York State of Health. You have on here the website and the contact information for the transition team. You're going to need to provide the items that are on the slide. When it says HCBS waiver documentation, if you have the NOD or letter of introduction or even a written notice from the DDRO that the individual is an HCBS waiver applicant and is requesting specific services and they have a completed application on file pending approval, whatever it is, whatever you can provide to show that this child is an HCBS waiver applicant or recipient, that will be helpful for the New York State Department of Health transition team. For adults, not children, because children must be moved. Adults don't have to be moved. They can stay on the New York State of Health. They can later become HCBS waiver enrolled. They can continue having their Medicaid through the New York State of Health. I will say there's one caveat for adults, is that there are budgetary reasons why you might want to have a case with the local Medicaid district as opposed to the New York State of Health. New York State of Health does not allow for the Medicaid buy-in for working people with disabilities. It does not allow for the special budgeting for DACs or PICLs, which avoids spend downs. So there is a very good reason to transition adults when they need extra budgeting help and maybe having more than the standard Medicaid income. So those folks you would want to transfer. For the children, you must transfer them. One of the issues that New York State Department of Health was kind of bothered by was it seems that a lot of the children had Medicaid originally with the local DSS. Something happened with the recertification, and instead of going back to the local DSS, somebody went and enrolled the child on the New York State of Health. So if this happens, the recert doesn't happen, please, for the child, go back to the DSS, request that they take care of any gaps in coverage, but do not recertify the child just using New York State of Health. Go back to the local DSS. All right, I'm going to pause a minute for questions. I really can't see the bottom part of it.
So I
All right, thanks for your patience. The first question I want to try to answer is about if you don't have access to e-PACES, somebody at your agency has access to e-PACES so that you can look at somebody's Medicaid. If you don't have it, go to your supervisor, have your supervisor go to your leadership, but that is definitely something that every agency will have. As to tell whether or not somebody has Medicaid coverage through District 78, New York State of Health, you're actually going to see that when you go into e-PACES. It has the Medicaid district. I see a different version of these things, so I don't see e-PACES every day. From my memory, it's a number, and the various counties are assigned various numbers. So like New York City is 66, Suffolk County is 47. The New York State of Health is District 78. All right.
Can we ask one more question?
You can try.
Can you clarify, children cannot be in the health exchange, but adults can? Is that a correct statement?
No, that is not a correct statement. Adults can be in the health exchange. Children can be in the health exchange. But if you are going to be getting waiver services or you are getting waiver services, you should transition those children from the New York State Department, from the New York State of Health Exchange over to the DSS. So yes, they can be, but if there's waiver services involved, please move them.
That's it. They said thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Elena. Okay. So for the sake of time, we are going to keep moving. We appreciate all the questions, and further questions, please follow up with your CCO. Welcome Chad Colarusso, our Self-Direction statewide coordinator, and he is going to begin. Welcome, Chad. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Thank you, everybody, for having me. So, in today's presentation, we wanted to cover a couple of things. First, a quick overview of OPWDD's self-direction model. We also wanted to touch on the relationship between care managers and support brokers. And then we will dive into how self-directed services should be written into life plans and some considerations around that. And finally, we wanted to share some of our available resources for self-direction so that people who are looking for more information beyond this presentation know where to go. So in getting into the overview, being well aware that many care managers are already working with people who self-direct and may know the model very, very well. We're also getting feedback from people who receive services as well as family members and others, indicating that not all care managers are familiar with self-direction. So we wanted to start this by really laying out the basic concept of what the model is, and that combined with the resources at the end of the presentation are meant to assist in helping care managers who are new or simply have not worked with somebody who self-directs and have not learned about the program yet, have that foundational information and know where to go for more information. One of the first things we have to cover when describing self-direction is what it is not. It is not a service. Self-direction is a way services are delivered. It's a service model. It's a way a person can choose to receive their services, but it is not itself a service. Some 5 years ago, there was a self-direction service known as Consolidated Support and Services. That was a comprehensive monthly service that was phased out those years ago, and this is no longer the case. It is now a service model comprised of an individualized mix of services, and that's because within self-direction, the person who self-directs really chooses the mix of supports and services that work best for them, how and where they're provided, and the staff that provide them. And of course, this is consistent with person-centered planning principles that exist elsewhere, But within self-direction, there's additional tools that help a person exercise choice. Within self-direction, it also means that the person who self-directs their service accepts some responsibility in helping to manage or co-manage with the designated service providers their supports and services. And it's also important to note that self-direction is available to people who are enrolled in the HCBS waiver with a wide range of needs. The last time I presented at this conference, we shared some comparison information about needs assessments for people who self-direct versus those who don't. And other than the self-direction population being younger, in general, in terms of needs assessments, people who self-direct very much have a similar range of needs to people who are not choosing to self-direct their services. So, the importance of self-direction, or why should I care? Well, conceptually, self-direction provides people who receive OPWD supports with a way to really align with the principles of self-determination and person-centered planning. It gives tools to help people have the most control in their service plan development and the services they're receiving. It really has the ability to truly drive person-centered planning, the process and the execution of the services, and the focus becomes around the person's needs as opposed to a traditional service model where you're maybe fitting a person into an existing program. But also, care managers should be familiar with it because utilization of self-direction is growing very rapidly. This started about the end of 2014. There was roughly 1,500 people. As of the end of 2018, almost 12,000 people were self-directing with budget authority. So the odds of a care manager having somebody who's self-directing, especially self-direction with budget authority, and we'll talk about what that is really increasing and increasing pretty quickly. So we really want to take this chance to encourage care managers who haven't learned about self-direction yet to do so because, again, the likelihood, if you don't already have somebody on your caseload who is self-directing, the likelihood that you will is quickly increasing. So talking about what self-direction looks like from a practical perspective, one way to describe it is what self-direction looks like for the person who self-directs depends on what authorities they're choosing to exercise. And there's two authorities that a person can choose, budget authority and employer authority. And it's really important to note that a person can choose either one, or very frequently it is both of these authorities and the responsibilities that come along with having that authority. So what is budget authority? Well, when most people refer to someone self-directing their OPWD services, they're talking about that person having budget authority. Budget authority, having the authority means the person makes choices about the goods and services they receive. What does that mean in terms of the service requirements? Well, in order to have this authority, the person must also work within an annual funding amount known as the Personal Resource Account, or PRA. This is a formula-driven amount that's embedded into the self-direction budget itself, and all of their services within that budget need to be maintained within that PRA. So again, when people are talking about, this person is self-directing, generally they're thinking budget authority, but as we'll describe later, that's not always the case. But people with this budget authority, they exercise their services within the budget. They also have the opportunity to choose to self-hire staff for community rehabilitation, respite, and supported employment, and that again is a very popular service selection. Most people are choosing, who self-directed budget authority are choosing that option. Having budget authority also grants people access to some unique services that are not otherwise available. Those include individual directed goods and service, other than personal services, family reimbursed respite. Both individual directed goods and services and other than personal services are actually a menu of reimbursable items. Individual directed goods and services, or IDGS, is a HCBS waiver service, whereas OTPS is a state paid service. They are somewhat similar. IDGS, among things it'll pay for, includes transportation reimbursement for the person, staff, or family, fundable community classes, membership people can join, certain therapies even that are outside of the state plan, things like massage therapy and music therapy can be funded, as well as clinician consultation, where that's not included in the self-hired rate. Other than personal services provides even more options. It's a small amount, it's only $3,000 a year, but it funds things that help a person improve their health and safety or live more independently that are not otherwise covered in services, things like a cell phone or personal use transportation or common uses of other than personal services. So again, when people choose to have budget authority, they have to have an OPWDD issued self-direction budget. Currently, that's an Excel workbook. It lists the services that people are self-directing, along with their personal resource account, their annual funding, and how much they're deciding to allocate between services. The self-direction budget does not in any way replace the life plan or previously the ISP. It's a tool to help the person in planning their annual service expenses and maintaining those costs within their PRA. One principle to keep in mind with the self-direction budget is that it is very much so intended to be flexible to accommodate that person's ability to control their services. Self-direction budgets can and are often amended to meet a person's service needs. It's an annual projection, so it's not a definitive amount. Once somebody has a budget approved saying, I want $20,000 worth of community hab and $10,000 worth of respite for the year, they might get halfway through the year and realize they actually need more respite and less community hab, and they have the flexibility to make and amend their budgets to execute those changes. Another key component of self-directing with budget authority is that the person, to have budget authority, a person who self-directs must affiliate with a fiscal intermediary. The fiscal intermediary, it means two things. It's both a provider agency as well as a service itself. Fiscal intermediaries are OPWDD provider agencies with HCBS waiver agreements. They perform actions to help a person self-direct. They do the Medicaid and state contract billing. They may also reimburse a person for eligible purchases or direct purchase those, which is often preferable. They also run things like payroll, do background checks as required, as they are a co-employer or employer of the person's staff. They do fiscal accounting reporting. What that means is, remember, that one of the big responsibilities of self-directed budget authority is making sure services are within PRA. So fiscal intermediaries on a monthly basis will send the person reports of their service utilization so that they can track how they're doing with those services and ensure they're keeping within their PRA. Fiscal intermediary is also responsible for ensuring Medicaid and corporate compliance. They are the entity that will get audited for self-directed services, just like any other service provider. As a service, fiscal intermediary is a monthly service. It's the fee that covers the costs associated with administering services in the person's self-direction budget. It has its own documentation requirements in order to justify that fee, and has an administrative memoranda that describes those requirements. Support broker is another key component for people who exercise budget authority. It is referred to as the person who acts as a support broker, but it's also an HCBS waiver service providing to the person who self-directs with budget authority. It's essentially there to help the person using the person-centered planning principles, develop their self-direction budget, make amendments to that budget, track expenditures within the budget. They also have a responsibility to develop and facilitate the person's circle of support. One thing that care managers should be aware of is that we very much so encourage circle of support meetings with support brokers where possible to overlap with life plan review meetings. They have a similar purpose, and that is something that's very much so encouraged. When a person has self-hired staff, it is the support broker who is responsible and paid to write the staff action plan. So again, they're a critical member of the person's planning team, their circle. They really need to be aware of things like life plan reviews and anything else that might impact, and the development of the life plan, of course, initially, and anything else that might impact their requirements for writing staff action plans if the person has self-hired community rehabilitation and supportive employment. And again, most people who self-directed budget authority, those roughly 12,000 people, are choosing to self-hire community rehabilitation staff. So a lot of support brokers will be covered with this. Support brokers can also provide other support tasks. Couple nuances on support broker. Support brokers may be the employee of a provider agency. They may be an independent contractor. Either way, the fiscal intermediary is in fact the biller and the provider of record for the support broker service. So even where you have independent contractors, they're operating as an agent of the fiscal intermediary. The fiscal intermediary is going to be responsible for compliance issues with that support broker, and as we'll get into in the life plan section, needs to be listed as the provider of the support broker service, because they are the official service provider, even if the person who actually provides the service might be an independent contractor affiliated with them versus a direct employee. Another, and this is a bit of a rarity, but it does happen, especially with family. There are support broker, unlike fiscal intermediaries. To have budget authority, a person must have a fiscal intermediary and have that service. Support broker is not mandated as an HCBS waiver service that the person must receive. There are some cases where a person acts as their own support broker. There are other situations where a person, often a parent or other family member, or even somebody who's a close friend, can act as a support broker but choose to do so in a non-paid capacity. And this means there's no billing being generated, there's no official support broker service occurring. We do require a person who's opting not to receive support broker as a service to have someone in that role, and that person has to have the requisite training so that they're familiar with what they need to do. Again, things like developing the budget, maintaining the circle, writing staff action plans, but they don't have to get paid for it. Billing does not have to be generated. So that could be a situation you encounter where a person with budget authority might have say a parent who's acting as a support broker, not being paid for the service. No Medicaid billing is happening. It's not a service that needs to be listed on the life plan because it's not actually a service. It's somebody fulfilling that role. So just wanted to let people know that is an allowable circumstance, and It does happen most frequently with younger people who have parents fulfilling that role. So that's budget authority in a nutshell. Moving to employer authority, the other authority, which again can be exercised along with or distinct from budget authority. Employer authority means that a person who self-directs has the ability to recruit people who work for them, make decisions about who those people are going to be providing services, decides what staff are going to be doing, and provides supervision over those staff. Now, employer authority can be exercised over three HCBS waiver services, that is community habilitation, supported employment, and respite. And that's hourly respite. The nuance with employer authority and budget authority is people can choose to have those services. People can choose not to have budget authority, which means there is no self-direction budget, there is no fiscal intermediary they work with, there is no support broker, but they reach an agreement and have a written memorandum of understanding with a provider agency to have one or all three of those services. With employer authority, the agreement will outline the person's authority and responsibility to hire and supervise, and also specify what the provider agency will do. As far as a care management perspective, that'll very much so look like traditional services. The additional details are worked out in the memorandum of understanding. Employer authority is often done in conjunction with budget authority. People who have self-direction budgets want to self-hire their staff or have agency supported, which is that same concept where the agency fully employs the staff, but the person has responsibility in recruiting, hiring, supervising them. And a person may also choose to have budget authority, self-direction budget, but wants all of their staffing coverage done as traditional, we call it direct provider purchased. So a person with budget authority does not have to also exercise employer authority. So I think that's one of the things people often get tripped up on, but keeping in mind that the two can be delivered together, or either one can be separate. So we talked about the support broker service and who the support broker is a little bit. One of the important things is, making sure support brokers and care managers are able to work collaboratively. The support broker in no way replaces the care manager or the care manager, or fills in and covers the care manager's responsibility. The care manager is still using person-centered planning to develop a person's life plan. The broker is then using person-centered planning processes to help the person with their specific self-direction budget and any staff action plans needed for self-hired community rehabilitation or supported employment staff. They're very much so partners. The care manager is really somebody the broker needs to work with in developing the budget, making sure that all of the relevant service needs for the person are included in that budget, and of course getting the information they need to write staff action plans for those services. In addition, people in many cases have very close relationships with their support brokers, and the support broker can be a principal partner to the care manager in helping to develop the person's life plan. So both are critical members of a person's circle of support. It is expected and encouraged for circle of support meetings as a support broker billing requirement to overlap with life plan meetings in order to encourage and facilitate that collaborative partnership. So jumping into self-directed services and what they look like in life plans. Well, they're going to look like other services for the most part. Again, our self-direction is not a service. Those services that are self-directed must each be individually listed in the life plan. Each service has its own administrative memoranda detailing the requirements. At this point in time, those are all drafted as ISP requirements. Of course, the ADM that came out over the summer assists in translating that for life plan requirements. Where a person does not exercise budget authority but is self-directing with just employer authority, there are no special considerations. The life plan listing will follow the same instructions as if the services were not self-directed. Again, there is that additional document, the details of the employer authority captured as part of a memorandum of understanding between the person and the provider agency. For people with budget authority, the fiscal intermediary will be listed as the provider agency in the life plans, always for fiscal intermediary, support broker, live-in caregiver, OTPS, family reimbursed respite, and any self-hired community rehabilitation, supportive employment, and respite. Now, the person with a budget may have other services in their budget that need to be listed on the life plan. Day rehabilitation, traditional direct provider purchase support employment, family support services. Just a couple examples. Those services could be provided by other agencies aside from the fiscal intermediary. So it's important to be able to know, is the FI the provider of the day hab because they could, or is the person kind of buying off the shelf that day hab from another provider agency? It's not always going to be the fiscal intermediary just because a person has a self-direction budget. And in another kind of myth we look to bust is, people sometimes get to believe that to self-direct budget authority, they're locked into receiving only those services available in the self-direction budget. And that's definitely not the case. Having budget authority in no way limits access to people's ability to get services outside of the budget. Services like environmental modifications, state plan clinical services, START, except for respite. Those are all services the person could receive, but do not need to be reflected on their self-direction budget, do not count against their PRA. One of the key resources that's linked to at the end is the self-direction guidance for providers. Attachments A and B of that document specify what services need to be listed in a budget depending on a person's budget, and they also, an attachment B lists out services that will need to count against a person's PRA versus those services that a person's eligible for, or could be eligible for, but don't count against their self-direction, but don't need to be included in the budget and count against the person's annual funding. So again, services that are self-directed with or without budget authority are listed individually. Those services that are HCBS waiver services, such as respite, live-in caregiver, and IDGS, will be listed in Section 4. Those that are state-paid services like OTPS, housing subsidy, and family reimbursed respite should be listed in Section 5. For services that are not agency-supported or direct provider purchase, that'll always include support broker, IDGS, fiscal intermediary, again, any self-hired community rehabilitation, supportive employment, or respite. The total units column should include a 0, and in the comments section, that should read per approved self-direction budget. And the reason for this, again, is granting that flexibility that's needed so a person can control their services, make adjustments as needed as their needs or wants change, or as they need to manage services and make sure they're staying within their PRA. For rehabilitation services, whether or not they're included in the self-direction budget, such as community rehabilitation, There must be a provider assigned my goal valued outcome in section 2 or 3 of the life plan. For non-habilitation services, IDGS is a big one. OTPS is another that comes up very frequently. There is not a requirement for a specifically assigned my goal valued outcome. There are requirements such as in the IDGS ADM, which talks about the ISP, now the life plan, needing to justify the need for the IDGS service. That could be done through my goal valued outcomes in section 2 or 3. It could also be described by needs in the narrative section, and that applies to all non-habilitation services. So broker, FI, a lot of really within the self-direction specific, everything except for community habilitation and supportive employment. So finally, want to share some really key resources that for people who are looking to learn more about self-direction. We do have updated information on our general self-direction website. There's information there for people who might be interested in self-directing their services, providers, support brokers. There's a lot of guidance, links to ADMs. Our most comprehensive and overarching document is that self-direction guidance for providers. We are working on drafting a self-direction guidance for people who receive services and their families. That's still in the works, but the guidance for providers has been out for a few years. It's updated about once a year, so it stays current. And again, that really, it does not supersede or replace the administrative memoranda for the specific services, but it supplements those documents by addressing some of these self-direction specific issues, as well as providing more detailed information about the model. Of course, the service ADMs, again, are critical. That's where the service plan specific requirements are going to be found for each service. And for questions on self-direction itself, a person's budget, what's allowable, the best place to go is the regional self-direction liaisons. They're going to be the most familiar with the person and their self-direction services. You can find a complete list of those liaisons with their names, phone numbers, email addresses at the link posted here. We also have a central self-direction mailbox that people can use to reach out if they need central office support on something. However, in general, our first step if it comes to Albany is to go back out to the relevant self-direction liaison, because again, they're going to be the most familiar with the specific situation. And I think I went to the very end.
All right. We will squeeze some time in for questions, so we're going to mute the line quickly. Thank you. And review some of the questions that we have and answer what we can. All right, thank you for your patience, everyone. We've had a lot of great questions come through. We'll look at the potential of having an information session to delve deeper into some of these, but we have a couple of minutes that will address some of the questions that were asked.
Okay, so again, yeah, we'll get to the kind of the questions that trended here. One is there any type of list of exactly what a budget can and cannot pay for? That's a good question. That does exist, again, within that self-direction guidance for providers. Attachments A and B are going to be your list. Now, it depends on the person's budget type, and that's what attachment A will specify, and attachment B will then give a broader thing of services that are in the budget versus services that are outside of the self-direction budget. The next question was, the fiscal intermediary must be listed as the provider agency, but each service type must be specified, correct? Yes, that is correct. That is the nuance. The fiscal intermediary for typically multiple services, the fiscal intermediary service, support broker service, IDGS, self-hired ComHab, they are the service provider, but each of those services are distinct, and as such, each service type must be specified, and those services are listed as specific services with their own service type, and they follow their own requirements per the ADM. For the services, do we select day have support and employment, or do we select the service as FI and provider as FI? Again, no. You're going to select the day have support and employment as the service type and the FI as the provider. And that's really important, and I know I've gone over it a couple times, but one last time, self-direction is not a comprehensive service. It does not all fall within the fiscal intermediary service. The fiscal intermediary service is just a monthly administrative fee that covers the FI's cost for administering services within the budget. It does not cover all of those services that may be in the budget, things like day have and support and employment. If in the budget they need to be listed separately, the FI may be the provider of those services. They may not be. A person for day have and support and employment can have a self-direction budget and purchase those from another provider.
Okay, one of the other questions that we received was that the template on how to complete a life plan in Section 4 indicates that the unit should be listed as the 5 nines or a 0, and are these interchangeable? They are absolutely not interchangeable. For people who self-direct and have a budget, in the units column you will put a 0, and in comments say, see the approved budget. For all other services, if you know the authorized units, you will enter that number. If you do not know the authorized units for a service, then you will put the 5 nines. So they have different meanings, and they're absolutely not interchangeable. Another question came in regarding the completion of the safeguard template for individuals who self-direct and have a life plan, and whose responsibility is to complete the safeguard template. I am not aware of a safeguard template. For everybody who has a life plan, Section 3 of the life plan captures the safeguard and health and safety needs for the individual. That should be completed at the life plan meeting with all members of the care planning team present and providing their input.
So we have a question about who would be responsible for signing the life plan. Is it the fiscal intermediary, the support broker, or the self-hired community hab provider? It's a good question, where the requirement is that the provider is signing the life plan. The fiscal intermediary is the HCBS waiver agreed upon listed provider, biller of record, employer of record for the fiscal intermediary, the support broker, and the self-hired community rehabilitation service. They should be the ones signing it. Again, the nuance being a person might budget for some day have from another provider. That separate agency would need to sign separately because they're a distinct service provider, even if the service is being managed as part of the self-direction budget.
Another question we received is there an MSC care manager checklist that care managers must sign for self-direction? There is not a special checklist for those who self-direct services. There is a required checklist that needs to be completed for everybody who enrolls in CCO Health Home Care Management Services within the first 30 days of their enrollment, regardless of if they self-direct or not. It is tied to the care management service option of Health Home Care Management.
Another question, this does come up a lot.
Could be our last one.
Okay. We're gonna rapid fire. Is there a conflict of interest that if a person is choosing to be a broker and getting paid? Yes, absolutely. That's not allowed. A parent cannot be the paid broker for their own child. That the support broker service falls within the same requirements as for other waiver services. They can act in the broker role. They cannot get paid to do so for their own child. They can be an unpaid broker for their own child and paid broker for others. Does everyone who self-directs get put in Tier 4? No. It was published way back when. It is an indicator. It can add points, but it does not automatically put most people in Tier 4. We actually did an analysis. We looked at people who self-direct in Tier 4. Most of those people would still be in Tier 4 even if they were not self-directing. And finally, information sessions, people have to go to them. Yes. Are they quarterly? No. They vary by district. If somebody's interested new to self-direction, they do need to contact their self-direction liaison and attend an information session when available. They're not being replaced by quarterly WebExes. That was a different informational presentation for families, not meant to replace information sessions.
This is Angie. Just one more thing. We received a couple questions or statements about CCOs or care managers choosing or not using Section 5 of the Life Plan. That is not an optional section of the Life Plan. Everybody needs to use Section 5 of the Life Plan, and it should be capturing the 100% state-paid services. If this continues, you need to contact the supervisor of the CCO, as again, this is not an optional section of the Life Plan.
All right, thank you very much, Chad. That was a lot of information. Like I said, we'll look at a future information session because there's a lot of different questions and clarifications out there, so thank you for what you presented today. Okay, so next, we will have Angie Francis, who has been contributing throughout the conference, who will be presenting on New York START.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Angie. I'm the Care Management and New York START statewide coordinator. I've probably talked to many of you, but I just want to go through what START is and where START is available in the state and how to list it in the Life Plan. So START is the Systemic Therapeutic Assessment Resources and Treatment Model that we've been implementing here in New York since 2014. It's a safety net service for people who are at risk of losing placement or services or at risk because they are in a restricted placement, such as inpatient setting or frequent users of high cost services like ED for crisis support. It's critical to understand that the START team does not replace any services, especially the care manager. They work in conjunction with you to help support that individual who is experiencing crisis and has, some higher need levels during that time. The reason that OPWDD has chosen to implement START is that it is a way to provide continuity of response in a crisis across our entire system. So the role of START. The number one most important thing is to know that the role of START is to build system capacity and is a consistent infrastructure regardless of where you are in the state. and this is to facilitate better outcomes and supports. So if you go into crisis when you are visiting, you received START services in New York City, and you go to visit your Aunt Louise in Region 1, and you go into crisis, START will respond, and you will get the same support, the same access to highly trained clinicians, and the same use of assessments and the same approach. So it's that consistency of an infrastructure across the state. I'm not going to read each of all these bullets. I just want to highlight some of the key points. The role of START, it's for the whole system, for the person to use as a means for consistent delivery and support to stabilize a person, and to use a plan and train on that plan. It's been developed using standardized and consistent comprehensive clinical assessments. So again, you'll notice that it is very clinical in nature. All assessments are very clinical in nature. Again, hence why they are not replacing care managers, because the START team holds that very clinical expertise and will work with care managers to help advocate to have the advocacy and request for those traditional long-term supports and services when START is, steps away or is removed from that person's system of support. Because START is a short-term therapeutic support, whereas care management is a long-term support and service. So each of the START teams, once they are fully operational, will each provide these elements. It's important to know as each of the teams come on, they're at various stages of their development, and to find out exactly what START teams in your area can provide and how, to access that, you can reach out to your specific START teams, and those phone numbers are in later slides. But what we found is that things really go wrong for people when systems don't fully know or understand an alternate means, or for lack of fully understanding the person and his or her diagnosis. So the teams are there to provide, again, that consistent infrastructure that really looks at the person holistically and incorporates the clinical elements. Additional elements of the model also include therapeutic coaching supports that can be delivered in the home for those enrolled in START age 6 and over. Some of the START teams also have therapeutic emergency or planned resource center services. Again, they are for New York START enrolled individuals who are age 21 and over. People cannot access these additional elements without already being connected to the clinical team. Here's some information on the in-home therapeutic coaching services. In order for an individual receiving START services to be recommended for these services, that recommendation will come from the START coordinator who has worked with the team. You're part of the team as a care manager, as well as that person's system of support, to really discuss what's going on with the person and how to best support them. It's important to know that in-home therapeutic coaching is coaching to the individual system. It is not the direct provision of community hab services or respite services. It is not the direct provision of service. It is coaching services so that the people around the person who is in crisis can best support and stabilize that individual. That can be delivered either planned or emergent on an emergent level. It's about building strength with the system and how to best fully support the person. Right now, we currently have 3 teams that are delivering in-home. Those teams are our Region 1 team in Western New York and our 2 teams in New York City, known as the Triborough START team and the Richmond Kings START team. The other element, as I said, is the Therapeutic Resource Center. Again, these are for short-term intensive therapeutic clinical supports. It is very similar to an inpatient setting, but on a smaller scale. They are 4-bed settings, but they are therapeutic and they are very restrictive in nature. It is to help stabilize an individual. It can be accessed both emergency or planned. Again, the START clinical coordinator is going to work with the whole team to make this recommendation. Not everybody who uses START will need in-home coaching or the resource center. We currently have 3 operational resource centers as well. Again, that is in our Region 1, Western New York area, and the 2 teams in New York City. There is a resource center located in Queens, and there is a resource center located in Brooklyn. Our Long Island team is working right now on the development of a resource center. And our Region 3 team is also working to move forward with the development of their resource center. Just because those 2 teams do not have their own resource center, those START clinical coordinators, if they have somebody who would benefit from the use of the resource center, can work with the teams that have a resource center, and there's the ability for cross-regional support. So people in Long Island often frequent the Queens and or Brooklyn resource centers, and in Region 3, we often have people accessing the Queens and Brooklyn resource centers as well. Western New York is a little bit farther away, but if it's clinically appropriate and determined by the whole team, is something that can be accessed as well. Criteria for an individual to be eligible to receive START services. Hold on, I lost my place. Oh, I'm sorry. You need to have confirmed OPWDD eligibility. The individual must be 6 or older. They present with a history of or a current acute behavioral health need that could be a mental health and or challenging behaviors. The person must have a team with whom to work with. So they must have a care manager. They must have a system to support the individual because, as I said, START does not provide the direct delivery of services. They work with that person's system of support to provide training and outreach and consultation and approaches to systemically support the individual through various stages of crisis to help maintain stabilization. Most importantly, this is a voluntary service, so there must be an interest in receiving START services. So the care manager, you may talk with a family or an individual and talk to them about the benefits or how START could benefit them. And if there's not an interest, then I would say keep advocating and keep educating on what START is. But if there is not an interest, we cannot force a person to utilize START services. Strongly encouraged, but we cannot force. Also, if that person is currently using or has a history of inpatient use or emergency department use, again, they would be a likely referral, or if they're at risk of losing a significant resource or support, they're getting kicked out of school, they have these unmet needs due to behavioral crisis, they would be somebody who you should be thinking about for START services. This is just a list of the current operational START teams and their phone numbers. At this time, we have START teams in every area of the state except for our Region 2, which is Broome, Central New York, and Sunmount. We are actively working on the request for a proposal to be finalized and released, hopefully in the near future. This slide, I just really wanted to highlight the role of the care manager versus the role of START, because again, I strongly want to, to continue to reinforce that START does not replace you as a care manager. Each of you really have your distinct roles and responsibilities and processes when you're in, in part of somebody's life. So I just wanted to share some of the key pieces. A care manager provides coordination of all developmental disability and health services for all individuals with OPWDD eligibility, whereas a START coordinator is, OPWDD eligibility is one piece, but just as I went through the eligibility criteria, they also need to have the need for START and, behavioral crisis. We also recognize that people are in crisis for other reasons. Maybe they're homeless. That is definitely a crisis, but that is not a START crisis. So START is very much focused on individuals who have behavioral health crises. Again, care management is a long-term coordination support for monitoring goals, health and safety, and developmental disability needs. And START is short-term and therapeutic targeted clinical coordination for a specific group of qualifying individuals. Care management connects care providers and assists in navigating systems with families and individuals and refers and links to services. START, is responsible for the development of a cross-system crisis plan for the system of support to implement and be updated continually and provide training on how to implement that plan. It's, again, highly focused on the clinical treatment, assessment, and stabilization of, that person to be connected to long-term supports and services that they may not otherwise be able to be approved for or access because of the crises or their behavioral health presentation. How to document START in the life plan. Anyone receiving New York START services will need to have New York START listed in his or her life plan. The expectation is that state-paid services are listed in Section 5 of the life plan, and as I said during the self-direction presentation, this is not an optional section of the life plan, it is required. START services most often will not have a provider-assigned goal, so showing up in Section 2 or 3. However, the life plan must indicate the need or justification for services, including START. Therefore, justification for START services within the life plan can be identified in my goals or valued outcomes in 2 or 3, if that is appropriate and makes sense, or can be described in the narrative section, Section 1. Please note, though, you will have to review and update the life plan as any changes. So if somebody is actively receiving START and they are stabilized and discharged from START, a life plan will have to be updated to reflect that. Listing START Therapeutic Resource Center services in the life plan. If individuals are also receiving the therapeutic resource service element, the care manager will need to review the administrative memorandum number 2017-01 on home and community-based services and non-waiver enrolled respite services. This will give you all of the information on how respite is listed in the life plan, and as part of respite, we also offer intensive respite rate. START falls under the intensive respite rate for those who qualify, meaning they must live at home, and the intensive respite rate can be used for those individuals. If a person lives in a certified setting, they can still access the resource center if it's found to be clinically appropriate. However, they are not eligible for respite, so it would not be listed as respite for the resource center. It would be listed in Section 5 as 100% state paid. This ADM will provide you all the information you need. It also has the intensive respite rate form that must be filled out and submitted to your local regional office for anybody seeking intensive respite rate to be approved, regardless of if they're START or not. And here's just a link to the START page. You can find the phone numbers to the teams, the regional START liaisons, information about each of the teams, my contact information, as well as my assistant statewide coordinator, Allison Frazio's information. And there's some great resources there as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Angie. So we're going to mute briefly to review the questions that we have before moving on to our next presentation.
So we did get some great questions, thank you. One of the questions we received is, if a person is living in Region 2 of our state, can they access a START team in another area where it is available? Unfortunately, we cannot cross systems that way. You know, and I know that Region 2 has been patiently waiting for START, and we are working very hard to get the RFA out. There was a question about, can folks from the Lower Hudson Valley access START? Yes, Lower Hudson Valley is part of our Region 3 team, so they can definitely be connected to START. The max stay in the Resource Center, when using intensive respite, again, as noted in the ADM, there is a capitation on the number of days in which intensive respite can be billed. But as far as the service goes, the Resource Center is, again, a short-term stay. For emergent people, it's not to exceed 30 days. We are seeing that most people are there for 2 to 3 weeks in emergent situations, and for planned use, the START team would work with the individual on identifying those days that are needed. Is START for individuals and IRAs as well as those living independent for families? Yes. At this time, START can be accessed by people who live in certified settings or by people who live in uncertified settings.
Okay, I believe that's it. We're going to pause for one more moment just to review the questions one last time.
So the last question received was, can START services be included in a life plan as a preventative service to avoid crisis? Yes, in the narrative section, you can most certainly add that, you know, the person is receiving START services and why, and it is, you know, that would make sense. How do we disenroll someone from New York START? So, and how do you do it in choices? So the care manager does not disenroll from START. Once a START referral is made and the START team accepts that person and is actively providing START services, it is the START team who makes the determination on when that person is stable and they can be removed from START services. They don't single-handedly make it. Obviously, the whole care planning team would be part of that conversation, but the care manager would not be the one to disenroll. The way that START is handled in OPWDD's TAB system or choices system, the START teams work directly with the assistant statewide coordinator of START, and each month they provide us with the enrollment and disenrollment dates of each of the elements, and we directly update tabs. How would you list the number of units for START on a life plan in section, well, as I said, START would go into Section 5 because it's 100% state paid. Section 5 does not capture units, but there is not units associated with START. Now, for the respite service, you would enter the number of units that person is approved to receive for respite, because it's not just respite for the resource center. People are approved to receive respite in a variety of settings. And those units would go in Section 4 of the life plan. It would say respite. It would not say start. If you don't know the number of units, then you would put the 5 nines. If you do know the number of units from the authorization letter at the front door regional office, then you will enter those units.
So that's it.
Sorry.
Okay. So that's it as far as questions. Sally, we're going to turn things over to you now. So we'll have Sally Berry presenting on front door process, LCED, and LCED redetermination. So you should be able to unmute yourself, Sally, and just tell me next to move the slides. So I'll wait to hear your voice.
I hope I have unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
You have. We can hear you. Wonderful. All right. So I'm going to mute, and just tell me next when you'd like me to move along, and then we'll save some time at the end for questions. You have until about 11:45, so we'll try to pause around 11:40 or a little sooner if we can, to make sure we have time for questions.
Sounds good. Thank you. So you can go to the next slide. So as Amanda said, what we're talking about today is the LCED, the level of care eligibility determination and redetermination, and a review of the service authorization process at the front door. Next. So just as a frame of reference, wanted to remind folks of the front door process steps, which I'm sure you're all quite familiar with. But just a quick review, the front door process includes an initial contact with someone, determination of eligibility, and also level of care eligibility determinations happen early on the front door. Front door staff do the DDP-2 assessment if it's needed, gather information about the individual, and a referral has been made if there isn't already a connection to a CCO, who would, of course, develop the IM and the life plan and then eventually request the services. Front door receives the service authorization request and also receives a waiver application, reviews those, and then proceeds to authorize services that are requested. And then finally, the individual enrolls into services. Next slide. So let me talk about the level of care eligibility determination first. The initial level of care is the responsibility of the front door, and this is a process that we've moved up into the front door flow, so it aligns with eligibility now, because the documents that are collected for eligibility and those that are needed for the LCED are largely the same, and it seems to be an efficient way of using everyone's time and resources. Front door reviews the eligibility, and the eligibility documents, as I said, are used to review the level of care eligibility. Next slide. The LCED initially and the redetermination also need to have a physician's signature on them. So the process to obtain this signature varies a little bit across the state. So in some cases, it is something that the regional offices can do using the services of a state physician. In other cases, and really the majority of cases, there is not a state physician available, and in those cases, the front door staff will pull together the LCED and the document and will send that to the care manager or the intake worker, to the CCO, whoever is the responsible person, and that requests that the CCO secure the signature, assist the individual and the family in securing the signature of a physician on the LCED. The state physicians are only available in Region 4 and in parts of Region 2 in Taconic and in Hudson Valley. Next slide. When the form is signed, if the CCO is taking responsibility for assisting with the physician's signature, then after the signature is obtained, the LCED form is uploaded into Choices, and the CCO staff notifies the front door using the email alert email boxes that the form has been uploaded and is waiting for review. And then once the LCED is determined, the front door staff reviews it, everything is as it should be, then the DDRO staff, again with the initial LCED, will complete the level of care date transmittal form in Choices. That is a form, as you know, that resides in Choices. It's not a paper form. And that date that is entered into the level of care transmittal form is transmitted to tabs and is then on record in tabs. For the LCED redeterminations, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail in a slide or two on that, the CCO is the one that completes this transmittal form in Choices. Next slide. Just as a wrap-up of the activity at the front door related to the documents that are shared and transmitted, if the individual is pursuing waiver, the evaluation documents that are collected for eligibility and LCED are used for the waiver application review. But we also need the application for participation, the documentation of choice, and if needed, and the individual is looking for parental deeming, the front door staff will request a letter of introduction from RISFO, and frequently using the LCED as a part of that justification for the need. All the LCED documents and waiver forms are uploaded into Choices using the documentation submission form. And again, this happens early on in the process while all the eligibility and waiver application documents are being collected, so that that's all aligning at the beginning of the front door process again. Next slide. So for LCED redeterminations, this again is the responsibility of the CCO. And the purpose, of course, of the redetermination is to make sure that the individual continues to meet the ICF level of care. The redetermination has to be completed and signed annually, not to exceed a year from the effective date of the initial eligibility determination, or from the signature on the previous year's redetermination review date if it's a future redetermination. CCO, again, is responsible for the LCED redeterminations regardless of whether the physician, or which physician signed it, whether it was a state physician or a private physician, doesn't matter. The responsibility moves to the CCO. Next slide. So redeterminations, when they're being done, are based on, of course, the direct knowledge of the individual that the person who's doing the redetermination has through observations, through discussions, through a review of recent psychological evaluations or social histories, physical and medical history, other applicable information that you might have access to, and a review of the criteria that's outlined in the initial LCED form. So the diagnosis, the disability manifested, behavioral problems. So all of this information is looked at as the redetermination is considered. Next slide. If there seems to be a need for additional information, if something is not quite aligning in the way you think it should, then you can certainly request for updates to physical or medical exams, for the evaluations, social or psychological. And those updates can be notes and signatures on the evaluations, verifying the current status and saying that they've remained unchanged, or they could include newly completed evaluations. It's the information that's contained in those that you're looking at, either one. And then the LCED transmittal form the CCO submits that into Choices. Next slide. Just to note one thing before we move on to the service authorization process, if there is a change in the individual and for some reason there's a suggestion or acknowledgement that the person no longer meets level of care, then the CCO needs to work with a regional office in those cases. As you know, if the person doesn't meet level of care, then they're not eligible to stay enrolled in the CCO health home, and the regional office and the CCO would need to work on that, or there might be a second step review involved, there might be an NOD that has to be sent, but if the individual at the end of the day is going to be disenrolled from the CCO, then that's one of those instances when the regional office has to approve that disenrollment if it's because of no longer meeting LCED. So moving on then to service authorization process, and I think this is information that should be familiar to most people, but we'll review and provide maybe an update or two. Next slide. So we'll be looking at requests for service authorizations for people who are new to waiver services and go through the front door, or for those individuals already receiving services who would be then using the service amendment request form. Next slide. At the front door, for individuals who are new to service, new to waiver service, as I said earlier, the front door staff looks at the DDP-2. We'll also be looking at information that we've gathered that helps us understand who the individual is and what their needs are, what supports they already have. The conversation happens at the front door around those topics. We also use information from what we're calling an in-process life plan. And the in-process life plan essentially is whatever exists before it's finalized that could be used by front door staff to better understand the needs of the individual and the justification for some of those needs. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. We also look, of course, at the request for service authorization form and any supporting documents. Next slide. So the in-process life plan, I think folks know at this point we have been doing some workarounds while the system to create the life plan and the information and the training that needed to happen in the conversion to the CCOs was getting stabilized. And we've been receiving other types of supporting documentation and information that has allowed us to approve service authorization requests absent the life plan. There will be a point at a date certain in the probably not too distant future when we'll be saying for new people to the front door, we will require a life plan be submitted in order to authorize services, except in emergency situations. So when that time happens, and for those opportunities now where a life plan has been developed and is in process, the process should be that care managers will submit the life plan. We'll mainly be looking at Section 1. That's going to be our primary focus, but we'll also look at other sections that we can review and potentially use. But it's really the assessment narrative summary that has the information that is most important to the front door, that tells us information about the individual's needs and their goals. The care manager can provide additional details that support the need for the services that are being requested, and information about the individual's situation, the assistance they need, and in what way. Next slide. So with the information from, again, the life plan, and we have begun to receive life plans at the front door, not a large number so far, but we are seeing some. And the nature of the information, can't stress enough, a well-developed and well-written Section 1 assessment narrative summary is just immensely helpful to the front door in understanding the individual and the needs. But there's additional information that can be provided as well that would relate back to the request for service authorization. The request for service authorization form allows care manager to insert, of course, the specific service that's needed and the service units that are being requested. There is a part on the form, the request for service authorization form, that allows for a very brief additional information, a very short explanation. So if someone is looking for a ComHab or DayHab, whatever the service is, you can write in or type in to the form probably a sentence or two at most that would provide some justification information for that specific service. It's not a lot of room, but you can insert something in that form. You can also, and probably more helpfully, use that section of the form to add in and reference something in another document that is being referred to that would support the request for that particular service. So you could say that it's something that's in some of the documents that were used in the eligibility process, for example. There might be something in the psychosocial or, whatever the evaluation of the form or additional information, additional document might supply, so that the front door staff, who most likely is going to know less about this person at this point because presumably the IM has been done, the life plan is under development, and there should be a pretty good knowledge base by the CCO staff, the care manager, of the person's needs and how to best explain why those services are needed. Next slide. Again, those documents that I just was talking about should have already been uploaded into choices. If there are documents that the care manager is uploading subsequent to the activity around eligibility, et cetera, then again the CCO alert mailbox is used to inform the district that there's documents waiting. And I believe there was a guidance document attached to the registration response to everyone participating in this WebEx that gives you information on the CCO alert email boxes that are specific to each DDRO district, not just region, but district, and what those are used for, what that alert email box is used for, and how to use it. Okay, next slide. So again, for folks new to Waiver, the front door actions are reviewing the RSA, the request for service authorization, the DDB2, the life plan, other service authorization documents that are helpful. We will authorize, we may request additional information either via email or phone call and conversation. We will ensure that the completed waiver documents have been submitted. And then we will issue a service authorization letter, a waiver notice of decision, which includes some next step guidance documents to the individual and the care manager. The service authorization letter and the waiver NOD are uploaded into choices. And then most of the activity I've talked about, of course, is related to people who are new to service, people who are already receiving services go through the service amendment process. And that includes a service authorization request form, which gives you the opportunity to submit information about what changes someone is looking for in their services, whether they're adding a new waiver service or they're adding, increasing the amount of services and the reason for that. That's also submitted through the CCO alert mailbox. The service authorization request form is one of only 2 forms that are submitted through that email alert email box, because we're trying to reserve that for those alert notifications so that someone from the CCO can alert a particular front door office that there's a document related to eligibility or a document related to waiver or whatever the specific topic is. And we're trying to avoid having those email boxes filled with other forms. But the service authorization request form is one of those forms. The other one is the transmittal form for determination of developmental disabilities. When it's updated, it's going to become also the form that's used to request TABS ID. So that's the only other form that would be used through that alert email box. The regional office staff will review the service authorization request for an amendment, may contact the care manager if it's needed, and otherwise will return the approved form to the CCO, to the care manager, and then from there it goes to the provider, of course, and to take action by submitting the DDP-1s. So that is all the information about the service authorization and on the LCED that I had prepared. So you want to pause, Amanda, and we can see if there's questions?
Yep, we've reviewed some of the questions that have come in, so Angie can read them off to you. And we've had quite a few things come in, so we can talk at a later date about what further, as we had said with self-direction, what further detail we can provide in one of our twice monthly information sessions that delves a little bit more into the specifics of who does the LCED and what documents are required. But Angie will read off a couple of the questions that have come in at this point. That
one of the questions we received, Sally, is does the RSA need to be submitted if a person is not requesting new services but might be moving to another part of the state or transitioning?
No, the request for service authorization is only used when someone is in the front door process, so is new to waiver services.
Thank you. There's some confusion about the level of care form, or LCED, versus the transmittal form. So the question is, after the CCO or care manager, manager completes the level of care redetermination, that form is uploaded into Choices as a supporting doc, correct?
The redetermination,
The redetermination is uploaded into Choices as a supporting doc to that individual's record.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then the care manager has to go into Choices to complete the transmittal form that enters the date that level of care redetermination was completed, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, yes.
So hopefully that clarifies for people the difference between the two. So everybody needs either an initial level of care or 365 days later must have a redetermination. Each of those need to go into the Choices record for the person, and for each of those, the transmittal form must be completed. So I just want to reiterate that.
And as we had shared during the hot topics on the slide regarding Choices and on the advisory that was shared, the 6-19, there is a user guide for the level of care transmittal form that does outline who has access to the form to complete it and how to complete that in Choices. And for enrollment, when somebody submits a CCO1 and that transmittal form for level of care has not been completed, you're going to see it in the messages at the bottom of the CCO1 where it's going to tell you that there is a level of care exception that's going to prevent enrollment, and you need to reach out to your DDRO to make sure that if, because you don't submit the CCO1 until somebody meets all those eligibility requirements, one of them being level of care. If you see the error that there is not a level of care on file, you would reach out to the DDRO to make sure that they complete that form to allow the enrollment to process.
Another question we received, Sally, is there a time frame for how long it takes the front door staff to complete their portion of the LCED transmittal and choices? Is there a process?
Yeah, you know, I'm trying to think if we've established a time frame for that. I'd have to check on that, Angie.
Okay. But, you know, essentially would be as quickly as possible, correct?
Exactly, yeah. And I think with the information that's coming in, because it's going to be dependent on the eligibility documents to some degree, so however quickly or slowly those come in, and as people know, that can take a very short time or it can take a really long time for some people. So those are largely the documents that are going to be used for the LCED form, but once those documents are in, the rest, including in those instances when the state physicians are available, should happen pretty quickly. And then a longer process might be having the private physician signature secured, because that, you know, that there are some things about that the CCOs can't control.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sally. Another question that we received was, when does a doctor need to sign the level of care? Is it for the initial and the redetermination, or just the initial? Do you want me to answer? Okay. The doctor must sign it for the initial, and then
yeah, I think the redeterminations can be signed by others, including a nurse or
QIDP.
Yeah, QIDP, and I think a physician assistant is. I'm sure I'm looking for my notes, but yeah, I don't think you need the physician assistance or signature for the redetermination.
No, you don't. It has to be signed at least by a QIDP. But for the initial, it must be signed by a physician. Depending on the area of the state, it will be a state-operated physician, and in other parts of the state, it will be the individual's physician.
Right.
You know, some people felt that the discussion on the transmittal form, this is the first time that they've heard it. We'd just like to clarify that we've been talking about the transmittal form, and information has been in place since July 1st with the transition. The transmittal form and the requirements of it were implemented as of July 1st with the transition from MSC to CCO. Let me see some other questions here. There's some questions about if other documents would replace a psychological or a social summary. No, you would need to have an ISP and or life plan, as well as a completed social summary / history, and the most current psychological that is prevalent for the person. So for some people that may have transitioned from MSC to CCO on July 1st, they may have never received waiver services, so they might have been in that old process where they didn't have a level of care completed until, you know, they wanted a waiver service. Now with the new process, they must have a level of care completed regardless of waiver service or not. So for those people, if the most recent psychological is still prevalent and makes sense for the person, that date can, you know, that can be used. We are not saying that all of these individuals need new psychological. It just needs, that psychological just needs to still pertain and be relevant for the person. So hopefully that answered those questions. One of the questions that keeps coming up too is about the level of care being completed for people who don't have or who are not requesting waiver services. And as Sally explained in the very beginning, the process has changed. Now OPWDD eligibility is determined and the level of care is done at that point. This is a new process as of July 1st. So for all people from July 1st forward, whether or not they're requesting waiver services, they must have a level of care. I'm sorry, I'm trying to look at some of these questions as well. A question came in that asking, is the level of care redetermination 2 forms now? No. The level of care form, whether it's an initial or a redetermination, is still the same form. It must be uploaded in Choices as the supporting documentation for that individual. What is new is the LCED transmittal form. That needs to be completed in Choices for an initial or a redetermination. That transmittal form is just a date. You're going to log in, you're going to put the date that the level of care was signed. What that's going to do is it is going to now put that date onto the CCO roster. So as care managers and CCOs, you can keep track of when the next level of care is due, because it must be completed within 365 days. So it is just a way to get that date into the system that speaks to the CCO's IT system as a monitoring tool. There's a question about, so care managers now need to upload every single level of care we have? No. We're asking that you upload the initial, so it's on file, but required to be the most recent. We are not asking if somebody who has been receiving services for 60 years that you load 60 LCEDs. We are not asking for that.
Okay, thank you very much, Sally, and thank you everyone for your engagement with some great questions. We are going to move on now to our next presentation, which will again be Angie Francis. She'll be presenting on the care manager's role in health home core services, and this will end our conference, so we'll end before 12:30, and we may take the entire time, but if not, I'd just like to do a little housekeeping before our last presentation to make sure that everybody is aware that our next conference will be on June 6th, 2019. We'll share the agenda and the materials beforehand. Please pass along information to your CCSLs and to your CCO leadership about agenda items and information that you would find helpful for this conference. We really want to make sure that we're presenting on topics and information that are supporting your job functions and clarifying the different areas that you would like. So again, that's on June 6th. We will be sharing through the advisory when this conference is available on the website to view, and we will be sharing through the advisory the next topic for the March 27th information session. So that is the next session, and we'll be sharing very soon through the advisory the next topic for that information session. So, all right, Angie Francis.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to talk again. This time I'm going to talk about care manager's role and the health home core services. I'm going to highlight some of the key elements of each of the 6 health home services. Again, I'm not going to get into details of all of the elements of each of the services. I just want to highlight some key points. So I don't want you to think just because I don't talk about a piece of it, it's not important. I just want to focus on some things that we've been hearing most recently and wanted to provide some clarifying information on some things we've been hearing, as well as questions we've been receiving and how they directly relate to these required health home core services that care managers must be delivering. So I'm sure that you've seen this slide many times. It is just a nice pictorial of the 6 services and, showing that the individual and the care manager are at the center of that. You are together because, it can't be done one without the other. Individuals we support need your help, and you're here because you want to support the individuals we serve. The 6 services are comprehensive care management, care coordination and health promotion, comprehensive transitional care, individual and family support, referral to community and social support services, and the use of health information technology to link those services. So the very first core service is comprehensive care management. It includes all aspects of comprehensive assessment, developing a plan that integrates the continuum of services and promotes continuity of care, that it's a plan that is developed that clearly identifies all paid and non-paid services and supports, and also clearly identifies goals and timeframes to achieve outcomes. It includes the aspect of having the individual and the care planning team as part of all planning, as they play a central and active role in all aspects. We cannot develop plans that do not involve the individual or the care planning team, because then, you'd be missing very key people that are involved in that person's life, as well as capturing good information needed for that comprehensive person-centered planning assessment. Also, you need to ensure the plan is assessed as needed or as prescribed within the policy, and clearly identifies progress and planning to achieve needs. So comprehensive care management includes, again, that development of, and I can't emphasize enough, an understandable and usable life plan. I know that many of you are becoming more comfortable in the use of the comprehensive person-centered planning tool, or also known as the IAM, as well as in the IT system that each of the CCOs you work with or for have purchased for the use of that health information technology for care management. I know in the beginning there was a big learning curve and some glitches that people really struggled with, and I completely understand. But as we work through these glitches and we learn the system and we learn the expectations, I want to make sure that all of you are truly empowered to use your good care coordination skills. Many of you have been, I don't know what's going on, many of you have been in the system as MSCs in the past or are new, but you are part of the coordination system because you have these great skills and you understand how to support and advocate for people. So don't let the IT intimidate you and put that on the back burner. Really use your skills and know what's best for the person, and make sure that those plans are really informed by what a person needs and wants, and that, again, it's usable and understandable. Again, like I said, a plan cannot successfully be developed without all of the providers included and actively engaged. We're not saying, you could develop a plan, but it will not be a successful plan. And it will make more work for you if you don't make sure that the key players are invited and part of that person-centered planning and the information that is used to gather the answers for the IAM tool, as well as to inform the life plan. One of the questions that we have been, hold on one second, we're just having a technical issue.
Yeah, we're just
I'm going to mute you for 1 second. Sorry, just bear with us 1 second. We're having difficulty with the WebEx. Hi, everybody. We'll be restarting shortly. We just had a slight technical issue with the PowerPoint. Okay, we think that everybody should be able to see the slides correctly now. Okay, so sorry about that. Okay, so one of the questions that we've been receiving frequently is, how are provider assigned goals, frequency, quantity, and time frame determined in the life plan? Again, the life plan is developed using a person-centered planning process with all members of the care planning team included, which also includes the person. So everybody should be working together to identify the person's goals and valued outcomes, as well as the provider assigned goals and the frequency, quantity, and time frame in which the provider will help the individual to achieve or will support the individual to achieve those goals. So there may, be some goals that come over from the IM tool, or there may be many, and at the time of the life plan is when all of those should be talked about to make sure that it makes sense and that they truly are goals that the person wants to work on and that the provider can support, and those things should be prioritized. So the most important thing is that as the whole care planning team, you're coming to an agreement on those provider assigned goals and the action steps during that life plan meeting, so that all parties leave the meeting with the same understanding. We get questions oftentimes about a draft life plan or a preliminary life plan. OPWDD has not required this type of involvement. It is up to you all as the care planning team as a whole to determine how this information is going to be communicated to the provider so they can go develop their staff action plan. So, however you come to that agreement on how communication is going to be handled, that is up to you as professionals to come to an agreement on. Right now, it's not freaking. Okay. What do care managers do when there are a lot of goals and supports generated from the comprehensive assessment process? Again, the goals and supports in Section 2 and 3 of the life plan are derived through that comprehensive assessment of the IM tool. Those are just a starting point and need to be refined and prioritized through the person-centered planning process that is done in a life planning meeting. They need to be driven by the person to the maximum extent he or she wants to be involved, and his or her care planning team during the life plan meeting. So the individual can determine the extent that he or she wants to be involved. The rest of the care planning team is required to be involved. Care managers, providers, the person, and his or her care planning team must collaborate to prioritize those goals that are generated from the assessment. And they should be those goals that are most important to the person to be worked on, as well as his or her safeguard needs. If there are too many goals assigned, the planning team will not be able to effectively monitor goal achievement and service delivery strategies or make adjustments. Or they should be making adjustments when needed for that optimum goal achievement. Continuing from that previous slide, the care planning team, through this prioritization, can decide to defer some of the goals that may have came out of that IAM tool for later inclusion in the life plan and staff action plan. And this can be documented in the narrative section of the life plan, in the care manager's notes from the life plan meeting, or in the comment section that aligns with that specific goal. And we'd want to see this documentation because as you, as a care manager, monitor and track over time, you're going to make sure that everything that a person wants to work on, is addressed and incorporated over time. And then, again, obviously, through this process and prioritization, the goals remaining in the life plan period should be manageable and included in the staff action plan for providers when they develop it. The comprehensive care management continued. The individual's life plan integrates the continuum of medical, behavioral health services, rehabilitative, long-term care, developmental disabilities, and social service needs. You need to clearly identify the primary care, physician, nurse practitioners, specialists, behavioral health care providers, developmental disability providers, the care manager, and any other providers directly involved in the individual's care. And this likens back to both of our previous presentations today with Self-Direction and START. And this is the use of all sections of the life plan. Another question that we've been receiving is, how are goals and or supports that are not captured in the comprehensive assessment process documented in the life plan? The life plan development, again, is that team effort. We know it's driven by the IAM assessment, but also from input with the entire planning team, to make sure that that life plan truly captures the person's comprehensive needs and meaningful goals. This is so that services and supports are tailored to help the person achieve what is most important. That life plan is the starting point for the development of the supports and services, so that staff action plan. If the life plan does not address a major goal area or support that a person wants or needs, it needs to be revised to do so. In addition, review and updates of the life plan must also occur when the individual or their family requests or representative requests that information be changed or added, and when the needs for supports and services or goals change. How should services be listed in the life plan? And I think that we've talked about this a couple times today, but just to reiterate, regardless of whether or not they are self-directed, habilitative and non-habilitative waiver services must be listed in the life plan. The expectation is that Section 4 of the life plan captures all waiver services and state plan services that are or will be authorized by OPWDD's front door authorization process. The expectation is that Section 5 of the life plan captures state paid services, natural supports, community resources, services a person can access with his or her Medicaid card, services provided by Article 16, 28, or 31, and federal, state, or county-funded resources, which are government services funded by agencies other than OPWDD. Justification for services where a provider-assigned goal is not required, so example, those non-habilitative services we talked about earlier, can be provided through my goals/valued outcomes in Section 2 or 3, or by needs described in the narrative section in Section 1. But again, it's just to reiterate, those services need to have justification. The second health home core service is the care coordination and health promotion. This really includes engaging the person and care planning team in coordinating and arranging for the provision of services and treatment recommendations. This is, very crucial. Having a dedicated care manager responsible for coordinating all aspects of care and overall plan management. It includes establishing processes dedicated to timely and effective communication between the care manager and the care planning team. This is a very important piece of the care manager's role to ensure that there is an agreed upon and effective lines of communication. It needs to include having defined practices and support effective collaboration on how decisions will be documented and are communicated with the care planning team. It includes actively developing a relationship with the entire care planning team, supporting coordination through regular review meetings that include all members of the team, and providing individuals with that 24/7 availability to a care manager to provide information and emergency consultation services. This doesn't mean that care managers are on call 24/7. It just means that all CCOs have established and very well communicated means for individuals to access somebody who is on call 24/7. So however that's developed in the CCO you work for, you can work with your supervisors on that, but there needs to be a telephone number that people, individuals can access 24/7, and that they, are getting responses back depending on their reasons for accessing and what the emergent need is. This includes the development of a provider network within the CCO for individuals to access. And it's also having a system for individuals' care needs to be tracked and monitored for outcomes. As care managers, you coordinate all aspects of the individual's life. It is all aspects of their developmental disability needs and services, as well as their health and behavioral health needs. Your job is to advocate. We give you that white flag to charge to the top of the mountain, and, you are oftentimes the loudest voice, or, the person at the front, really advocating for the person you serve. Care managers, we need to ensure that all needs are communicated and discussed regularly and ongoing with all members of the care planning team. Maybe it's, through continual email or quick phone check-ins or however you establish that, but it needs to be regular and it needs to be ongoing. And it must include, again, all aspects of the individual's life and may require more than the minimal required visits when needs change. How should supervision be listed in the life plan and staff action plan? This, again, is a question that we have been receiving quite frequently and falls into this key health home core service. The supervision levels in the life plan may be generated from the comprehensive assessment process and are considered a starting point for review and discussion during the person-centered planning process. Through the life plan meeting, a person's supervision needs are discussed with the individual, his or her planning team, which includes discussion of the essential supports and oversight documents that contain important information that outlines supervision and safeguard needs. So it could come from behavior support plans, plans of nursing, risk management, safeguard plans. All of this information needs to help inform the decisions and what is ultimately put into the life plan document. Through this review and discussion, the appropriate overarching level of supervision is identified and documented in the life plan. The staff action plan will then further define and outline the person's safeguard needs and how they will be implemented by that provider, including any additional detail needed on supervision levels identified in the life plan. So, for example, the life plan may say frequent checks less than 30 minutes. The staff action plan can go to further define and provide detail that says checks every 15 minutes or checks every 5 minutes, whatever is relevant and pertains to what that provider is doing. What is most important to know, the level of supervision defined in the staff action plan cannot be less than the overarching level of supervision outlined in the life plan. So, the life plan is that overarching care plan that provides the high level of need. The staff action plan gets into the details, but they cannot contradict each other in what that level, that minimum level is. Okay, care coordination and health promotion continued. Care managers must be aware of the day-to-day status of the individual, especially during a hospitalization. Ongoing and consistent communication with that care team is extremely important. When hospitalized, this may include, the care team may, grow. It may include the hospital, the social worker, RNs, physicians, whoever those staff are that are involved in this day-to-day status. So your care planning team is not a stagnant team. It can ebb and flow based on the individual's needs. For the most part, it'll probably be the same people, but when you have changes, that's where you're going to have people that may come and go. Just like our conversation earlier about START will not be part of your care planning team forever. They'll only be part of the care planning team while the individual's receiving the service, just like hospitalization. Specifically for individuals of the Willowbrook class, if the individual is on an extended hospitalization, that means 7 days or more, the care manager is required and must send out a letter notifying all parties, including a status update and expected discharge if known. We have Lori Lemkel here with us, the statewide coordinator of Willowbrook. Lori, is there a required form that care managers should be using for this, and where can they find it?
Well, in terms of the guidelines for it, we do have residential notification guidelines that are on our OPWDD Beyond Willowbrook webpage. So that'll tell you kind of like who do you send it to, what is their contact information. We don't have like a template letter like we do for so many other things. But you should work with your local Willowbrook liaison if you have any questions about how to compose that letter and what should be included in that letter, who it should go to. All of that information you can find on that. We call it a cheat sheet. It's a green cheat sheet, and it just tells you the who, how, when, what, and all related to any types of notification. But the hospital notification, as Angie said, needs to be done if the person is in the hospital for 7 days. That's when that letter should be getting out. Now, the only problem that occurs is if perhaps you weren't notified of the hospitalization by the residential program, and that has, of course, happened. Obviously, that's nothing you could do about that. That was a fault on the side of the residential program that you weren't notified. But as soon as you are notified, if I were you, I would talk to the residential program about how important it is, because as Angie said, you are the people with that flag going up that mountain. You to me are the people, the focused people, who's making sure that everything is coordinated, and you want to make sure that everybody is aware of what's going on, so that when that person is ready for discharge, things can be in place to make sure that they're safely discharged back home.
Thanks, Lori. And I'd only add that it's my understanding that each of the CCOs does have a Willowbrook lead within the CCO. So if you are on this call and you're not sure where to find some of this Willowbrook class member information or the forms that Lori references, you can definitely connect with your Willowbrook lead, and they will definitely be able to connect you with that information and where to find it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the third core service is comprehensive transitional care. This includes having processes in place, and when I say having processes in place, it's really the CCO to have processes in place to facilitate services for individuals when transitioning between levels of care, so such as hospitals, ICFs, rehab facilities, residential schools, and to make sure that all of the care managers either know who to go to on what these processes are or are trained individually so that they can implement them. You also need to have processes in place to support a person if they choose a new health home provider and to foster interdisciplinary collaboration. Continuity of care is supported, and there's a relationship with the care planning team. That is one of the biggest pieces of comprehensive transitional care. Again, the plan identifies supports and coverage needed in the event the person is hospitalized. People need to know what to do and how to support a person when their needs change, especially if they're hospitalized. Many of the individuals we support cannot speak for themselves or might be scared or nervous in this situation. So we really need to be able to support, and people need to know what those coverage needs are. The care manager must ensure that the appropriate supervision level is incorporated into the plan. Needs may require further assessment based on clinical recommendations. Care managers, again, must actively advocate and ensure that the individual's needs are being met. This is, when people are hospitalized as well. And care managers must communicate with providers to ensure the appropriate staff coverage is provided when a person is in the hospital. So we're not saying care managers need to provide that staff coverage, but as the care manager, you need to be that advocate working with the provider and ensuring that that person's needs are met. And, that the coverage that is there is based on what the person needs. Care managers and residential staff must communicate regularly to ensure that the individual's needs will be appropriately met prior to their discharge home, like Lori just said.
And also, Angie, it's Lori again. Also, I just want to point out that, depending on what's in that person's life plan regarding hospital, staffing coverage, when that person is in the hospital, things could change. It could be that they require more, and that's something that, as a team, you guys will have to decide, and it should be really based on the clinical profile of the person. So not everybody needs 24/7 staffing when they go into a hospital, and not everybody's plan should say that either. It's really a team decision, not one person on a team, but everybody's decision altogether, and understanding that, that person's needs may change while they're actually in the hospital, and that's why we look for really kind of what the clinicians are saying regarding that unique person's needs.
Thanks, Laura. Very good points. Okay, again, updating the life plan if a goal, support, or safeguard changes. As I said, that life plan is the active document defining the person's needs, habilitative goals, valued outcomes, and those required individual safeguards and IPOP needs. So the care manager and the members of the planning team must have agreed upon methods of communication in place to make sure that any changes, whether it's a goal or a safeguard or support, that you have established lines of communication on how that's going to be communicated amongst the team. One, so the life plan can be updated, but two, so that everybody supporting the individual is aware of any of these changes. Some of them may be minor, but some may be very serious. Identified health and safety needs must be met immediately and communicated effectively to the support providers. Safeguards identified in the life plan must be updated based on the individual's identified or changed needs. Changes that must be immediately communicated are sentinel events, including accidents or events resulting in serious personal injury, major medical events, major psychiatric event or decompensation resulting in extended inpatient psychiatric hospitalization, and or a significant change or improvement in behavior or physical functioning. Those need to be immediately communicated, and I'm sure you can understand why. Additionally, staff action plans must be updated and revised accordingly and provided to the care manager. Again, this is why that agreed upon lines of communication between the whole care planning team is so important, because these changes impact the person's entire life. Adding a new service while transitioning from the ISP to the life plan. So I included this in here because this is a question that we have gotten recently several times, and I just wanted to provide some clarifying information. So as you know, we are in a time of transition where individuals may either have an ISP or a life plan in place. It is recommended and best practice for the team to convene a life plan meeting to transition the ISP to a life plan when a new service is authorized for an individual who has an ISP. And during the life plan meeting, personal outcome measures, goals, safeguards, and supports would be established by the person in collaboration with the planning team for that new service or need. The habilitation providers would then follow the staff action plan development process. Should the care planning team choose not to transition to a life plan at this time and instead do an addendum to the ISP, the habilitation provider would continue to follow the habilitation plan development process. Now again, I began with what we would feel is best practice. However, we recognize we have given a period of time to transition, so that is still allowed. However, we would strongly encourage the transition. If the person has a life plan in place and a new service is approved and added to the life plan, this would be reflected in a life plan addendum, and the habilitation provider would then follow the staff action plan development process. So the life plan has addendum sections for 2, 3, and 4 of the life plan, and any changes would show up automatically. That's just how the IT system drives information. But if there's a change or an update needed in section 1 or 5 of the life plan, then you would just add that added information in there. Okay, the fourth core service is individual and family support. The life plan, again, reflects preferences, education, and support for self-direction, is accessible, again, and understandable, and based on the individual's preferences. The care manager coordinates information and services to support individuals and their families or representatives to maintain and promote quality of life with a focus on community living options. The care manager assists to increase knowledge through peer supports, support groups, and self-care programs. The care manager discusses advanced directives with individuals and their families or caregivers. I would like to add as appropriate here. I know that we have been hearing from the field that some families don't want to talk about this, and that is completely understandable. So this should be discussed as appropriate and when appropriate. Also, the care manager communicates and shares information with appropriate consideration for language, literacy, and cultural preferences. Accessibility and support. Again, the person is always the center of the planning process. That process really needs to be tailored to his or her culture, communication style, physical requirements, and personal preferences. So every life plan meeting is not going to look the same. It really needs to be tailored to the needs of the person. The life plan needs to be, again, I told you I couldn't stress this enough, usable and understandable to the person, but also to assist those helping the person provide supports and services with an understanding and sensitivity to what is important to the person. So if the life plan, is extremely long and has too many supports and services in it, it's not going to be usable to the individual or the person who's trying to support them. So again, why we really need to review, prioritize, and make sure that it's person-centered. The fifth health home service is referral to community and social support services. And this really requires that care managers help to identify those available community-based resources. They actively manage the appropriate referrals and access and engagement and follow-up and coordination of these services. They need to support effective collaboration with community-based resources and ensure the life planning includes these community-based and other social supports. Also need to ensure that the community engagement activities that are meaningful to the person are included in the life plan. Okay. One of the questions that we've been receiving frequently is how do I address inappropriate provider-assigned goals? So, for example, what if someone who lives independently was assigned a support for fire evacuation to a community habilitation provider? So all members, again, of the care planning team need to work together to identify the person's goals and valued outcomes. You know, what is going in Section 2 and 3 of the life plan? And those need to include the support needs that will be met by those paid supports and natural supports, or the person directly, and should be identified through the planning process. Individuals will have support needs that may or may not be delivered by a paid support. In instances where the support need is met by an unpaid support, the person's needs still need to be planned for and included in the life plan. For example, support for fire evacuation may be needed for a person who lives independently. The planning team works with the person to identify how the need could be met. So maybe there's a special agreement with the fire department, or maybe there's a paid neighbor, but it wouldn't be assigned to a community hab provider because they don't live with the person. They're not with the person 24/7. So I hope the examples help to make sense there. They need to come to agreement on those provider-assigned goals and action steps, because that's important to happen during the life plan meeting so that all parties leave that meeting with the same understanding. And the life plan must identify accurate and appropriate goals and supports. If there are inaccuracies, again, they must be corrected and updated. I'll just say that I have been hearing from a variety of stakeholders that care managers will say, I can't update the life plan, I don't know how to update the life plan. If you're in that situation, I really encourage you to go back to your supervisor and to your CCO, because the life plan must and can be updated. So we really need to make sure that that is being done. The last piece is the use of health home information technology to link services. And there are standards and expectations that include that the CCO has a system to support and meet the delivery of the health home core services. There's a system that has structured information for policies and procedures and practices to electronically create, document, and execute the life plan, the initial and all updates. That there's systemic process to follow up and monitor an individual's needs and referrals. The system allows information to be shared and accessible between the entire care planning team. And we know that, the health information technology system is that electronic system. The reason that it is so important, and it felt to be so important by OPWDD, is because that it ensures consistent, timely, and comprehensive information sharing. We do understand that the health information technology may not be available or accessible across the state at this point in time. However, if it is not accessible, there must be another mechanism for prompt communication agreed upon by the care manager and the habilitation provider and other members of the care planning team to ensure that everybody is getting the information that they need and require to support an individual accurately and in a timely fashion. So that is, I just gave you a ton of information, and I'm sure that there are many questions. So I'm sure that we can pause for a minute, and then we'll unmute to answer some of the questions.
We'll review these, and I just want to also highlight that we had gone through the website earlier, and when you are under the information for providers, there's the previously hosted information sessions, and on February 20th, there was a session, Quality of the Life Plan, that also has a lot of helpful information, so you can review the information in those PowerPoint slides, and the recording was posted. But we'll go through these questions and answer what we can in the next 10 minutes. And if you still have some outstanding questions, a lot of things may be answered by the information included in that presentation. So I'm going to pause for a minute, and we'll be right back. All right, everyone, we're going to go through some of the questions that have been asked. So the first question is about, is there an extension for Willowbrook class members regarding the due dates of life plans? Are they still due to be published and distributed by 3/31/19?
So this past Friday, OPWDD leadership had a meeting with leadership from each of the CCOs, so I would strongly encourage you to talk to your supervisors, but there has been an extension granted for Willowbrook class members that their life plans must be in place no later than December 31st, 2019. And further conversation that all individuals in Tier 4 will have until December 31st. So please discuss this with your supervisors for more information about that, because it was communicated by OPWDD to your leadership.
Okay. As of right now, the effective dates for HCBS waiver services is the same as the effective date of the life plan. What happens when the life plan has already been published and the individual starts a new service such as DayHab? What should the effective date of that service be?
So the effective dates of the services that a person has will be the life plan review date. And then if during that period of time, which is a year, a new service is added or approved for the individual, then, it would be the effective date of that service. And then when you go to do your life plan update, you can update those dates accordingly, because they will continue to roll forward.
Okay. Would an addendum be needed if a member has a temporary change to a safeguard, if an individual has a temporary change to a safeguard?
You would need to make sure that it is clearly noted that everybody has been communicated of this change, and depending on the change, the life plan may need to be updated and revised.
Okay. This is a question regarding clarification of Section 3. We're being told that SEMP services should not be listed in the IPOP section of the life plan. Is this correct? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. No, that is incorrect. Section 2 and 3 of the life plan can capture OPWDD waiver services. So Section 2 is a person's individual goals that they may want, and Section 3 is broader than just safeguard needs, but is also those services that help a person and support a person to achieve his or her valued outcomes or goals. So it is perfectly fine to have SEMP or any employment services in Section 3 of the life plan. There is no problem with that whatsoever.
Okay. Okay, we've gone through some of these, so we're just going to pause again for a moment.
All right. Again, we received another question about the health home checklist. As I stated earlier, the checklist is a required document that the care manager must complete within 30 days of a person enrolling in health home care management. If you go to the link that Amanda showed earlier where the policy manual is, there is a September 26th memo, policy update memo, that talks specifically about the checklist, how it needs to be completed, and the time frame. And then under that is also the checklist that is to be used. In the 926 memo, it clearly describes that the care manager or the person completing the checklist at the CCO is required to sign the checklist. Anybody else is best practice and not a requirement. But you can find all of that information clearly outlined, as well as the checklist, on the OPWDD website where the policy manual is posted.
Okay, we're going to pause again for a moment. Okay, so we're going to answer one more question. I just want to highlight, as people are hopping off, that this last slide says June 6th for the next quarterly conference, and it is June 5th, so I appreciate that somebody pointed that out, and it is June 5th, Wednesday, June 5th, not June 6th, so my apologies. Okay, so Angie, for a final question.
So we received some questions about an individual being authorized for services prior to the completion of a life plan. So somebody new to services. So in Section 4 of the life plan, you can put what you're asking for through, how Sally's presentation earlier, what you're requesting of the front door to be approved. So if you're requesting Community Hab, you can put Community Hab in there, and you can put in how many units you're requesting. When you get the authorization back from the front door, outlining what services have been approved and the specific number of units, you will then update the life plan to reflect those approvals. And that's where you can, in the meantime, you're working with those providers to start some preliminary person-centered planning and conversations about the goals, and all of that work can be done simultaneously. You do not have to wait for one to do the other. So, yes, you can have services that are being requested in the life plan that have not yet been authorized.
Okay. Yep. All right, so we are at our time for today. I again want to thank everybody for taking the time to participate and the great questions that came through. If you have questions that were not answered during today's presentations, please reach out to your supervisors and CCO leaderships, and they can communicate with our OPWDD staff to seek further guidance and to communicate with OPWDD as guidance is established. Again, the next conference will be June 5th, and this conference will be posted to the OPWDD website, the recording of this conference, and we will announce via eVisor E when that is available. Thank you so much. Have a great day.